joined the Historic Society about a year and a half ago when I realized that it existed. My daughter, who happened to come, which I was completely shocked by because she had been sick, is the 5th generation of Longwood residents of our family. I am the 4th, and my mom is a 3rd generation resident, and she's going to tell you a little bit about our family's history.
For those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Janet Gilliand, formerly Woman. I'm currently residing in Longwood. I've spent most of my life here. The love I have for Longwood is deeply rooted in memories of growing up and spending time here with my parents, my grandparents, and my grandchildren. Many generations of our family have lived on the same street, which is on a small lake called Lake Ruth. It's our family's little piece of heaven in Longwood, is what we call it. It's always been a popular destination for family members living out of the state to come visit us as well. When people ask for directions to our home, we always said with a little giggle, don't blink when you go through Longwood, because we live just a little bit down the road on the right, across from the VFW, but before the railroad tracks. My earliest memories of Longwood mirrored what I call a sleepy little downtown. So a little history about my grandparents. They were the first ones that decided to move to this area. My grandmother, Ruth Nelson, formerly Ruth Taylor, was raised in Indiana by her Aunt Lolly and Uncle Laura Thompson, which that's a really old name, Uncle Laura. They owned a family restaurant. It was just a little casual place. It had a counter with bar stools at it, and it had little diner seats, small cafe tables. That's where my grandparents actually met and fell in love. My grandfather hired on as the cook there, and Wendy will pass around one of my pictures that I brought of my grandma and grandpa. You can see why my grandfather played Santa in Longwood at a local store at the time called Carhartt's Department Store. When Grandma's aunt and uncle retired, they moved to South Florida, but my grandparents continued to work the restaurant in Indiana, and they raised their family there. The specialty dish of the cafe was oyster crackers and chili. Well, my mother said that she sat behind the counter of the restaurant and she would sneak oyster crackers until she had her fill, and then one day she said, I cannot eat another oyster cracker in my life. That was the end of that. The cafe was called Thompson's Restaurant, and it was located in Indianapolis on Capitol Street. So you might wonder how they ended up in Longwood. Well, we had relatives that lived just a little this way to the south, beyond the old Lyman High School in Altamont Springs. And they came here to visit them. So while they were here, they fell in love with this gorgeous piece of property, and they bought it. My grandfather especially loved Longwood. It was his heart. They bought all the property on the north side of the lake, and the property continued to the old Dixie Highway, which I think it might have been known as the Sanford-Orlando or Orlando-Sanford at the time. I'm not really sure. But the name of the street has changed many times. My memory of it is as the old Dixie Highway, now known as Ronald Reagan Boulevard. The plan was to build a home and to eventually move here. The house was actually completed in 1942. It's still standing, and it's a small little house, a blue cottage, which is on the end of our cul-de-sac. They didn't move here until 1946. They just were running the restaurant, basically using it as a second home. The house was a lot smaller in 1942 when it was completed, and we brought pictures of how it looked then and how it looks now, and there's been a lot of improvements and add-ons, so it really doesn't qualify as a historical house because it's been modified. But I think the last time it was modified might have been in the 1960s. But getting back to their Florida story, they continued working at the restaurant in Indiana, and they commuted back and forth. Traveling on that road was quite rough. I brought along a picture. The original picture had writing on the back that described the road and the difficulty getting here and back. It said 60 miles of those kind of roads between Waycross, Georgia and Jacksonville. Some places sand so deep we could hardly get through. Took this picture while the engine was cooling. Just after my grandparents' home was complete, my mom and dad decided they wanted to come live in Florida. My grandparents sold them a large piece of property. My dad thought it was paradise. He loved Florida. And they decided to build their home here. And while they were building here, they lived in my grandpa's house. It was a tiny little house at the time, and Daddy just kept adding rooms on as the family grew. He was still adding rooms onto the house when I was in high school. My dad, Jack Waltman, was a construction superintendent for R.C. Stevens in Orlando. He worked there for 52 years, and he's built many of the buildings in this area. Wendy currently owns the home that I grew up in. I tagged all over the place with my dad while I was growing up. One of my favorite things to do was be with my daddy. His favorite pastime, one of them, was gardening, and I still love it too. Thinking back, I can hardly remember a time when he wasn't working, but building was his passion. He was always happiest when he was making something, and I could tell when he was happy because he whistled a tune everywhere he went when he was working. I think it was his love of making things that was actually the artist in him. He tried many different types of art all through his lifetime, including cooking. One of his favorite pastimes was relaxing with a fishing pole. He got up at 3 a.m. to cast a net, before work. He often cast a net and fished before work. Things were kind of slow in the area, so many of his jobs were out on the coast, which he loved because he would go out 3 o'clock in the morning and do his thing, fishing and all that good stuff before he went to work. He came home Wednesday and Friday nights. There was a bakery in Water Park where he stopped on Friday nights to bring home wonderful baked goods, and I'd say they were sweet and good. He always loved our delight when he came home for the weekend after a long week of work. Our neighborhood looked a lot different back then, with nothing but cows and pasture on the other side of the lake. My grandparents at different times also had cows, horses, chickens, and they were behind his house. One day my dad decided he was going to beautify his driveway, so he put out like 10 small, really pretty little palm trees. And Grandpa's cows got out that very night and ate them all down to little stubs. So that was on their menu, right? My mom, Betty, was always taking care of the family. I can only remember her working outside of our home once, and that was when I was a teenager. My dad was very old-fashioned. He believed that the man was supposed to be the provider of the family. And he always wanted a full meal when he got home from work. Most of our friends at the time, they also had women in their household that did not work. So, you know, I thought I'd grow up and not have to work. Well, life has changed. My mother was a fantastic cook. She also took care of my grandparents as long as I could remember. My grandma Ruth, she never did drive a car in her life, and my grandfather lost his sight and was considered legally blind when I was very young. So Mom took them everywhere they needed to go. She was devoted to them. One of the reasons I felt so blessed in this place was the fact that my grandparents lived so close to us. I could run right down the dirt path, right between their home and ours. I was there to flash, and I spent a lot of time with them. Grandpa was a great storyteller. He grew up in Minnesota and North Dakota. His parents and grandparents came to the country here from Sweden, I think around 1895. I'm not really sure of the date, but that's my suspicion. And they located into a Swedish-speaking community in Minnesota. It was called New Sweden. And then by 1900, they had moved to another place in Sweden called Lake Buffalo Village, and that was in Renville. They were farmers, and the reason that they were in Minnesota was because a lot of the Swedish people have moved to Minnesota to continue farming because it was so much like the old country. My grandfather said a Swedish blessing for our family for Christmas, right before the Christmas meal. That was the only time I ever heard him speak Swedish. I really wish I had learned the meaning or recorded the prayer. I spent time with him on occasion in downtown Longwood, and he took me to see the old bank vault. He said that the Longwood Hotel had sold for $17,000, and I'm thinking that might have been the first time it ever sold. I'm not really sure. But there was a restaurant one time in the hotel that we would go to, and also, as you know, office space. I was 16 years old, I think, when they made a movie in one of the rooms upstairs, and it was called Johnny Tiger. The star of the movie was Chad Everett, and I was in love with him. One day, I was with my grandparents and had gotten tired of playing their old piano. So I decided to look through, they had a cedar chest, one of those old red cedar chests in their spare bedroom. And I would go in there and I would play the piano. They had a really old piano. And I got bored, got a little bit nosy, and inside the chest I found these garments right here, which are from Mexico. They're antique. Very antique. And this one is really in bad shape, but it is gorgeous and made to wear with both outfits.
They're handmade, so they're really, really intricate.
I think they looked a lot better when they were still in the chest. Well, when I looked inside the chest and found them, it prompted a small story from my grandfather. He said that they had sold a piece of their land to the energy company, where it still stands, just before the railroad crossing. So they decided to go on a nice long vacation out west, traveling to Mexico. While they were in Mexico, they received a call from my father that said that the energy company was kind of infringing on their property. So they rushed home. But Grandma did purchase these in Mexico, so I thought you might like to see them. They are antiques. One of my first memories as a small child was our iceman. We had an old wooden ice box, and a delivery truck brought our ice to us. I really looked forward to his arrival because he would give my sisters and me small slivers of ice. And that was, of course, in the summertime. We didn't want them in the winter. That was a great treat in those days. We also had a small T.G. Lee dairy truck that came bi-weekly, and it brought all of our milk and dairy products. If my mom decided to spend a day shopping in downtown Orlando, which there wasn't much shopping around here, just very little, so she often went to Orlando to shop. She would just leave the empty milk bottles on the doorstep, and the delivery driver would put our replacements in the ice box. The house was rarely locked. The windows were always open in the summer. We had no fear of theft. It was very quiet and peaceful. My parents made sure Sunday was a family day. Sometimes we would go for a Sunday drive, seeing lots of cow pastures in the area. There was a lot more countryside around here in those days. They often took us out to dinner on Sunday evenings, and when my mom needed a tasty break, they would take us to the Dairy Queen in Sanford. I'm glad it's still there because I love ice cream. My second favorite place to visit when I was little was the zoo in downtown Sanford. I loved watching the monkeys, and I especially remember the llamas because my cousin got spat on by one of the llamas while we were visiting them. And I have memories of an old lion there too. Other family times after dinner, my dad would pull out an encyclopedia and we would choose one person to just ask the rest of the family questions out of it that were likely to stump everybody. We also frequented the library, which was located in a wooden building. I'm not sure which one, but it was here on the street. And I think
this
it's
building.
just-
This building.
This building. All right. Another activity enjoyed by our family was going to the drive-in movies. The drive-in was located on 1792 in Sanford. That was our favorite, but it was often interrupted by the sound or the roar of Navy jets because there was a Navy base that had airplanes. We got our first TV, black and white, when I was about 10 or 11, and following that, our first party phone line. There were 4 families sharing the line, and if they really got tired of waiting their turn to use it, they would just ask you to get off. You could often hear them picking up their phone and hanging it up while you were on there talking, and it felt like someone was always listening to your conversations. We sometimes went to New Smyrna Beach and picked up lunch at a place located just on the left before the beach ramp. I think it was a Maryland Fried Chicken, but I'm not sure. They had cardboard box lunches of chicken or shrimp with french fries, and nothing ever tastes better with a little sand on it. It was good. My favorite swimming spot, besides Lake Ruth, of course, which we swam in a lot, was San Lando Springs. They had a gift shop, a jukebox, and a place to buy food. At one time, a movie or show had been done there, and they left their native huts behind, so it was like a jungle adventure walking through the woods over there. I remember going to the Baptist church here on Church Street for a few months, and then we later switched to the United Methodist Church in Castleberry. There was a small chapel there at the time, and we spent a lot of time at the church. Almost everything was closed on Sundays, so that left a lot of time for the church members to enjoy getting together for social events. And we had a lot of ice cream socials and parties at our house, and there was another family that was located on Lake Triplet that was always eager to entertain the group. We made a lot of friends while we were there, and my parents actually started leading the Methodist youth group while we were there. One of my favorite things to do was play horseshoes, and since we had our own set, I was pretty good at it. There were barbecues in the winter, and games then too. Another favorite pastime was croquet, and we had a lot of property to be able to set up a challenge. Other activities that we did were badminton, shooting baskets, bicycling, hula hoops, card games. We spent a lot of time visiting the Senator, that old cypress tree at Big Tree Park. I can't even count the number of photos we have in front of that tree. We brought a few of the older pictures along, and it was a special place for our family. So special, in fact, that we had trees planted and memorials placed there in memory of our family members that had passed. It was within walking distance from our neighborhood, and we always took our out-of-state visitors there to see it. We were heartbroken the day the big tree burned. We could hear the helicopters that morning flying overhead and rushed to the news to see what was going on, praying that the tree would be preserved after we realized it was on fire. But at least they were able to save the Lady Liberty, the smaller cypress tree. As far as education, the only school here when I started, the first grade was Lyman High School. Well, Lyman, period. It offered, in 1957, it offered a full 12 years of school. It was located where the Millweed Middle School is now. I had a fantastic teacher there, Mrs. Winkle. She was my first and second grade teacher, And she reminded me of my grandmother. She was just so sweet and nurturing. My older sister Kathy went there for her entire 12 years. As time was passing and the area was growing, the county started building new schools. I went to Longwood Elementary from grades 3 to 6. I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, how they made us get under our desks and hide, like that was really going to save us from an atomic bomb. When it was time to enter the 7th grade, Seminole Middle School had just been completed except for the lunchroom. On full school days, we brought our lunches and sat in the open corridors to have our packed lunches. The area was growing at a good pace then, and I remember double sessions at school. I was always fortunate to get the morning session so I could go home in the afternoon and play. I went back to Lyman when I got ready to go to high school, and I graduated from Lyman in 1969, which was the old Lyman school still. The new one was opened the year after I graduated. Just about 2 miles south of the old Lyman was a train freight stop that was operated by friends of my parents, Rose and Paul Kerr. And they lived there with their daughter for a time. And it was a really noisy place to visit, but I loved going there. Learning how to drive on what was once called the Old Dixie Highway was a little nerve-wracking. It was a brick road at the time and not too busy, but I thought it was way too narrow and scary. I also remember a large curve in the road going south from our home. We live about 1.5 miles that way, south or north of Longwood. And they took the curve out of the road when they redid the highway. I also remember driving on I-4. It had just been completed when I was in driver's school. And our driver instructor made us practice overdrive while we were learning how to drive, which that kind of scared me too. But there was not another car in sight when it was my turn. Nobody was on that road. Just down the Old Dixie Highway from here going north, there was a forest tower to protect the area. It was on land in front of the electric company or substation, just before the railroad tracks. It was banned at the time because there was forest as far as the eye could see. We often climbed the tower, and the man that worked there gave children brave enough to go up that high a Smokey the Bear certificate. All of our children and many of our grandchildren were able to climb it before they tore it down. But in the later days, it was unmanned and not maintained. Krista didn't want to go all the way up, my granddaughter. My parents made it possible for me to live here in Longwood now by selling us a piece of property they owned on Lake Ruth, and they helped us build our home here. It took 2 years to build our home because we both had full-time jobs, and my parents did too. We could only work on the house on weekends. Wendy's daughter, Kristen, the lovely girl there, she is living in that house right now, or owns it, actually. We sold it to her, and when I retired, we decided to downsize and built a small house next door to our old home. My mom and dad also helped my sister build her home on Lake Road, and in the early days of my life here, my cousins also lived on the street at the beginning of the street. We all helped each other and enjoyed our time together, whether it was simply a day on the lake or working together. Over the years, my husband Jim, right here, he liked to get out and wander around the lake. He discovered several antique bottles still in good condition along the shoreline of Lake Ruth when the water level was down due to droughts. And Wendy brought one of those bottles today, and we researched the bottle and found out that it was actually from Ireland. And when it was made to contain ginger ale. But we're not really sure how it got in the lake or the other bottles that he found in the lake, because that was before our days of burying trash in the neighborhood.
Did we know what year that was or no? Did we know what year that bottle was from or no?
Late 1800s, I think 1890 something, maybe. Well, in closing, I I hope you enjoyed my memories of the world back then. Things here have changed considerably by the time I raised my children. The Altamont Mall and other major businesses had begun to establish themselves in the area. The once pristine lakes and waters all around us began to be polluted, including our own Lake Ruth. We had a cow pasture when I was growing up on the other side of the lake, and they built a subdivision there, and of course all the runoff from the big subdivision caused problems in the lake. So I look back to my grandparents' era of horse and buggy. I'm still stunned that they put a man on the moon during their lifetime. There are many things our children and great-grandchildren will never experience, but I'm sure I will miss out on great things their generations will accomplish. I grew up in a wonderful time and would not change it for anything. It's been a blessing living here in Longwood on Lake Ruth, named after my grandmother, Ruth. It's our little hidden gem that we all share a great love for, and it's kept our family very close. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I hope you learned a little something about Longwood history.
I just want to say thank you so much to my mom, because I know she has a lot of anxiety speaking in front of people, as I do. So, she did great.
You did a great job.